1.
Good afternoon. It is 5:32 p.m. A budget workshop of the Board of Trustees of San Elizario I.S.D. held this May 19, 2021 is now called to order. Mr. Woodward, roll call, please.
Madam President, let the record show all board members are present.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. On March 16th, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meetings laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to the coronavirus. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. We have a quorum in attendance. Members of the public are attending meeting by use of both telephone conference call, online access, and through use of an email link for questions. If a member of the public submitted written comments in advance, the board president or a member of the audience administration will read the comments into record before or during the board's consideration of that item. If you would like to provide comment at a future meeting conducted by the video conference or telephone call, please follow instructions on the meeting notice. All other meeting procedures will adhere to the board adopted procedures to the extent practical. An audio recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. We apologize in advance for any unforeseeable difficulties and ask for your patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. If you have questions about these suspended laws, please call the Office of the Attorney General at 888-672-6787 or by email at toma@oag.texas.gov. Thank you. May we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now proceed with San Elizario I.S.D's mission statement. San Elizario I.S.D. mission is to graduate students with skills to meet the demands of a changing world by promoting student success as non-negotiable, channeling resources to match learning needs of students, employ and retain quality staff so that San Elizario is a proud, innovative, and academically superior district. We will now proceed to item 2, open forum. If we have anyone sign up for open forum.
Ma'am Licon, let the record show that no open forum requests were submitted.
Say it again.
Okay.
Let the record show that no open forum requests were submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. We will now move to item 3, new business for action items. 3A, discussion possible action to issue certificates of election for newly elected trustees. Ms. Priscilla de Mata, legal counsel.
Board President, good evening, board members. I don't know if this is on, but today, basically, all I need from you is a motion to approve issuing certificates of election for our new trustees, those re-elected, and also our new person joining the board today.
Any discussion? May I please have a motion?
I move to issue certificates of election for new elected trustees. I second.
We have a motion on the floor by Mrs. Hernandez, second by Ms. Garcia. Any other discussion? No. May I entertain a motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I want to make my way down to the. Okay. As we move on to item B. We have item 3B, discussion and possible action to obtain officer statement and conduct the oath of office for newly elected trustees for the following positions. Place 1, Ms. Michelle Garcia. Place 2, Mr. Eduardo Lopez. And place 3, Mr. Bernie Madrid. So we just press. At this time, in the name and by the authority of San Elizario Independent School District, this is to certify that a general election held on May 1st, 2021, Michelle Garcia was duly elected to place 1 on the Board of Trustees of San Elizario Independent School District. Ms. Garcia, you can certify. Next person would be Eduardo Lopez Cota for place 2. Mr. Cota. And for place 3, Mr. Fernie Madrid. Now, Your Honor, Judge Samaria, you have the floor, sir.
It's ready.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to say a few words. So before we get started, I want to thank obviously your incredible superintendent, the president of the board, and all the board members and the community. You know, I really believe there's 2 boards that are going to be really challenged, and that you really are going to have to do some things that you might not have done that are going to test, you know, your school district. And but I know you're very competent to do that. It's the medical society is going to have a lot of challenges. UMC, their board, and the school boards. The school boards, we're very privileged and we're very honored that you participate. You know, as volunteers in a community, the challenges that we've had. It's just been an amazing ride. It's been a journey that I don't think any one of us would have ever expected that we'd be in this situation at this point in time. But the way we've handled it as a community, you know, I've gone from wanting orders to make a difference, to challenging orders with the governor, to all these kinds of things. But finally, the community decided that they were going to protect themselves and take care of themselves. And I think if we continue not to allow someone somewhere, myself or anybody else, but as a community, that you come together and determine what's the best thing that you could do for San Elizario, what's the best thing you could do for this community. And if you gather in that way and you rally in that direction, you're going to be very successful. I really believe that every community that we in El Paso throughout the entire county has its own uniqueness, has its own way of approaching things. And I think that once we understand what is it that San Elizario can do to contribute to the overall process, and we do that at every single community, I think we're going to be the role models. I really believe we're going to be the role models for any community. You know, President Kennedy always said that, you know, if not you, then who? And if not now, you know when? And I've said over and over, if it's not our community, who will do this? Who will begin the process of doing the right things and the healing and the unity that takes place? I think it's the El Paso community. The whole county can be that role model for the rest of the country in a situation that's extremely difficult right now. There's division, people thinking differently, there's more aggression. And I think El Paso could be that impetus to go forth and become, you know, that we get recognized once and for all, not as an isolated community somewhere miles and miles away from Austin or from Washington, but at a community that has always stood together, a community that makes a difference. And so I encourage all of you, the board members, you know, to continue this unity. We get recognized quite a bit. where people come in, whether it's all the medical professionals that came in, 1,800, by the way, that came in, the Texas National Guard that came in, they all say the same thing. You are collaborative and you have some amazing people. And because of that amazing people and that collaboration, I think we're very successful as a community. So once again, I encourage all of you. I think we still need to wear a mask. We're still going to have an opportunity to open the bridges, which means that we're going to have, people coming into our community. And I think if they see us that we're wearing our masks and they see the discipline, they'll do the same. Because the herd immunity will never will be reached unless Juarez, Chihuahua, and ourselves are doing the same things and working in the same way as a region. We have beautiful relationships with them. But sometimes these are things that we have to address, just like in a relationship. We have great relationship, but some things need to be addressed. And I think the community here needs to understand that we want one day to open the bridges, but in a community that's not going to be vulnerable for them or vulnerable for us. And so one thing I'll never forget is that we're 3 souls away from reaching 2,600 people that died in our community. 2,600. There's populations way over us that have larger populations that didn't even lose 300 or 400, which is a lot, tremendously a lot. So we know we're unique. We don't know why that's happening, but we know we're unique. So I ask you once again, and I plead to all of you, and that you carry that out, that we're almost there. I think we still need to wear masks. I still think we need to be disciplined. And I think that's going to take us a very long ways. Once again, I wish all of you the best. I know the challenges are there, but I also know the caliber of your superintendent and the passion that I've dealt with. I always say that when the rural superintendents get together, I've always said either work with them or get out of the way, right? Because they're going to make things happen. And I'm very appreciative of your work.
Thank you.
In the board. So we'll get started on the swearing in. So in the name and by the authority of the state of Texas, I state your name.
Michelle Garcia.
Do solemnly swear
solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the duties
that I will faithfully execute
of the office of San Elisario
the office of San Elisario
Independent School District Board
and the school district board
of Trustees of the state of Texas,
of the state of Texas.
and will to the best of my ability
Will to the best of my ability
preserve,
preserve,
protect,
protect,
and defend
and defend
the Constitution
the Constitution
and laws of the United States
and laws of the United States
and of this state.
and of the state.
So help me God.
God.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Just here, says Chelsea. Oh. Congratulations. Okay, Ms. Garcia, Mr. Lopez, can you come down for a picture?
Sure.
Can we get over? Just come on down off the street. That way, where are we gonna get cameras? That way. What we wanna do, we're gonna hand it. Oh. I'm sorry. When you hold us again.
Everyone is so quiet. Yay. The signs backwards, Julie. Make it down, right? Upside down earlier too. We'll now proceed then with item 3C. Consider and take action to elect new board officers. This will be our board of trustees. First position up, board president. Nominations.
I nominate, oh, sorry, but I wanted to nominate once again with Yukon.
I second.
So we have a nomination. I got nervous.
For yourself.
Mrs. Licon, and second by Mr. Madrid. So then Licon as board president. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to board vice president. May we please have a nomination?
I still think that she's already started. I think it's only fair that she stay. So, Ms. Miranda.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion to keep Ms. Miranda Hernandez as board vice president by Ms. Garcia, seconded by Mr. Chavez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to board secretary. May we please have a nomination?
Ms. Licon, I would like to nominate myself. I'm sorry. But I think that Mr. Madrid has done an amazing job. Amazing. I just want the chance to be able to have the position and see what I can do to help. And if that's okay with Mr. Madrid.
Madam President, that being the case, let me nominate Ms. Michelle Garcia as Secretary, Board Secretary.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a nomination by Mr. Madrid to nominate Ms. Michelle Garcia as board secretary, seconded by Mr. Chavez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We're now proceeding to item 3D, budget workshop for 2021-2022. Mr. Roberto Rivas, Chief Financial Officer.
I want to say to my family, to my whole family sitting in the audience, thank you guys for coming. I really love you. Thank you for sticking with me through everything. The happy times and the sad times. Thank you guys so much. And we're having a board workshop now, but I will see you after if you want to go to my house or what have you. So love you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you to my kids too that are out there. Naz, Isaiah, and Joaquin. And I always adopt kids. So Angel's one of my sons now, and Chris and my nephew. Love you guys, and my city council member, best friend over there, Mr. Lorenzo Leiva, and Cindy. Love you guys. Thank you so much.
I just want to welcome Mr. Lopez to the board. Being that he's the new one on the block, so I just want to welcome him to our board.
Absolutely. He didn't hear you. Unless he's.
He's still stressed.
Mr. Lopez.
I just want to congratulate you and welcome to our board. Thank you.
Congratulations. Bienvenido.
So, Mr. Lopez, welcome to the San I.S.D. Board of Trustees. I would like to have our cabinet members that are here before Beto officially gets started. If we can start on this end, the names are going to come really fast, but you'll get to know them. So if I could have Dr. Swellman, will you start, please?
Good evening, Rogelio Segovia, Associate Superintendent.
Thank you.
Jesus Martinez, Director of Support Services.
Christine Jackson, Athletic Director. Raúl Jaques, Director of School Nutrition Programs.
Thank you.
Ricardo Sanchez, I'm the IT support specialist.
Thank you.
And the one person you don't see here because he's behind the scenes helping us is Horacio Hernandez. He's our Director of Technology, but there he is waving on the screen. So he's the one that makes all things magic, technology happen. So thank you, Horacio. Welcome, sir.
Sir.
Thank you. Good evening, Board President Licon, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Mr. Chavez. Tonight, it will be budget workshop number 1. The request is made to have multiple budget workshops, so the plan is to have number 1 today. And so what you'll see in the presentation will be an overview of state finance rules, and then you'll see some of the bigger decisions kind of at the macro level. All departments saw a budget cut, all campuses saw a budget cut, and then you'll see details for staffing, for the way the workshop is, I mean, the way the budget is currently being developed, right? Based on the feedback tonight, then the idea would be for budget workshop number 2 to actually bring back comparisons that show you by org and by object code this year versus the following year. And then the third meeting would be strictly the adoption. At that point, you would get pretty much the budget by function. So with that said, I'm going to go slide by slide, kind of like I've done in previous years, but please feel free to jump in and ask me a question if you have it. This first slide, you will notice I do recycle some of my slides for the purpose of the budgeting meeting. This is one of them. Kind of gives you a definition as to what budgeting is. It's a process of allocating resources based on prioritized needs of the school district. And then you see on the bottom, kind of the 4 main goals. Budgets are driven by the school district's tax rate. So obviously that's the first one, right? Don't want to increase your tax rate and charge your constituents. You also want to avoid a reduction in force. You want to have a balanced budget, and if there's money left over at the end, you want to try to provide some type of a pay raise. This is kind of like a seesaw, balancing your budget. The expenses, you always want to pay for more things and afford. That's why I kind of draw it this way, right? There's always more that we need versus the amount of money that comes in. This next slide, public school finance overview. Here you'll see a lot of terms whenever there's press releases, whenever you hear the TA is updating funding, this or that. These are some of the basic terms that come out there, which we will cover. The foundation school program, the basic allotment, local share versus state share, golden pennies versus copper pennies, tier 2 funding, equalization level, and then the EDA, the existing debt allotment. And then here you have kind of have a bunch of question marks, right? Because even though it's a bunch of different terms, somehow at the end they all link in together, and you'll see we get most of our money via 2 programs. So we'll start off with the first one, the foundation school program. This is pretty much the state's main program for funding school districts, and it has 2 components. You'll see the definitions of both of them there: operations funding and facilities funding. And so as we move on, you'll see a slide with the 2 different tax rates. You have your M&O tax rate and your INS tax rate. And so those are kind of split up based on these 2 funding components. The M&O, maintenance and operations, funds the operations side of the school district. And here's where tier 1 and tier 2 come in. So tier 1 becomes your basic level of funding, which is your basic allotment. And then you have special allotments that provide funding in the terms of multipliers like SPED, like CTE. And then you have tier 2. And tier 2 supplements tier 1 by guaranteeing a specific level of funding per student per ADA for each penny of tax effort above the school district's maximum tier 1 rate. And I'll get to those rates a little bit later. The second program is a facilities funding, and this one pretty much funds school district facilities. There's 2 programs within it. The first one is the instruction facilities allotment. This is strictly for instructional facilities. So if you're building a school only, this funding works. The EDA, the existing debt allotment, is for any bonded debt, which includes both instructional and non-instructional facilities. So the bond that the voters would then suddenly approve in 2014 was an EDA bond because it included non-instructional facilities with it. That's when we added the turf, we did roofing projects. Had it been only the construction of a school, then we would have looked through IFA funding first. The basic allotment, this is pretty much what drives most of the money. And you'll see throughout the presentation, most of the money comes in through kids. And this is where it all starts, the basic allotment. You have the regular program allotment, and you see the definition there. It's BA, basic allotment, times the regular education ADA. ADA is average daily attendance. That pretty much means if a kid's here every single day, here we get full funding. If they're absent 5% of the year, we get 95% of the funding. The other program allotments are for special types of students, to include special education students, to include CTE students, bilingual students, economically disadvantaged students. And so the way these work, there's some examples there at the bottom, examples of certain weights. So you pretty much take the basic allotment and the multiplier becomes whatever these weights are. So in the case of the early education allotment, that is funding for, that's funding that is generated from kinder through third grade students that are either bilingual or economically disadvantaged. So we get the basic allotment times a multiplier of 0.10 for every one of those students. And so that becomes important because since all of these special allotments have their multipliers based on the special type of student, the money has to go to those students. Can't use it to fund pretty much the basic program, right? That's what the basic allotment is. This next slide, local versus state share. There's a table there that shows you two examples. One example, the first one on the left, you start off with 12 million. That's total cost of the tier one for this example, school district. And then it shows you that district's properties values. It shows you their local share at 0.9164 of the maximum compressed rate, and then shows you the state share, right? So that's pretty much, if you look at the last two, 6,414,000 and 5,585,000. This is a district who is entitled to $12 million, but they cannot generate $12 million on their own. Their local share is only $6 million. So the state is picking up the difference of 5.5 million. You compare that to the table on the right. There you see the same entitlement for tier one, which is $12 million, but look at the property wealth for that district. $1.4 billion, probably sitting on an oil field, very rich district. Look at how much money they generate on their own. Look at their local share, $12.8 million. So what does that mean? That means that they're pulling in more money than they're entitled to. And because Texas has a rule called, it's referred to as pretty much the Robin Hood rule, but it's equalization. So school districts, students are funded the same based on the tax effort of the district. So in the case of the district on the right, they have excess local revenue, which pretty much means it's recaptured by the state. The state uses it to fund a district like the one on the left. So the table on the very bottom kind of shows where we stand. Our total tier one for the 1920 year was $28 million. We only pulled in 2.2 million of that. The state kicks in the difference of the 26. Golden and copper pennies. This becomes the next piece out of the way the funding is driven. So you have, after HB3, there was a rule that pretty much is trying to compress all districts within 10% of each other. So every year, what's happening now is TA is pulling our certified values, which are due. The appraisal district finishes submitting those, finishes finalizing those by July 25th. So in early August is when TA pulls all the data and they see where everybody falls, and then they determine the MCR for that given year. And so here you'll see there's a total of 8 golden pennies and 9 copper pennies available. And you see the little table on the bottom left where we stand. So this year we do have all 8 golden pennies, and we don't have all 9 copper pennies. It's not a bad thing. Once a district has all 8 golden pennies and all 9 copper pennies, you're taxed at the highest that you can be, right? So if you're in financial problems, you can't increase your tax rate anymore. You're at the cap. We're not at that cap. Means if things get worse, we still have some leeway to increase the copper rate to gain the full 9 cents. HB3 though made that a little bit difficult. Now they require an efficiency audit. There's a listing of auditors that the state has, and they come out and they audit your district, make sure you're running efficiently. And if you are, then they give you the green light to actually go out and put that tax rate increase on the ballot, because that does require voter approval of that. And so at the bottom right, you see the 3 pennies, and here is where you see the way the tiers are funded. So tier 1, which is your basic allotment, that's funded up to the maximum compressed rate, the MCR. And then tier 2 is split up in 2 parts. Level 1 becomes your golden pennies and level 2 becomes your copper pennies. And so this slide, tier 2, it shows you an example of how that tax effort can be different between school districts. So you can have two school districts, one very rich, one very poor, and at the same tax rate, one may be pulling in $120 versus $25, right? So what you're going to see on the next slide, titled Equalization Levels, here you see how that difference is made up. So you see on the left, the first bar. On the previous slide, you just saw the blue section. Now you see a yellow section, right? That's the state aid. So that's where the state kicks in and finds school districts up to the 160% within the tier 2. And then so at the bottom, you see kind of where we stood last year, the guaranteed yield for the level 1 and the level 2. So because we have golden pennies and copper pennies, once we get tier 1 based on the students we have, those golden pennies and copper pennies are bringing in that extra $3.4 million. And then on the right, once again, the table up top on the right, there you see the difference between the copper rates. We do have some wiggle room there. The next slide. This is the last slide regarding the way the funding works. This is the existing debt allotment. Like I said, this program pays for both instructional and non-instructional students. The kicker on this one, though, as you see on the third note, since funding is based on 88, as we lose kids, as our enrollment goes down, we have to make up our local effort, right? And we have to increase our tax rate to pay for it. Because it's based on 88, if you have less kids, simple mathematical calculation, you need to kick in more to get the full EDA aid from the state. The good thing is, as you see on at the very last bullet point there, we only have one outstanding bond, which is the bond that was approved by the voters in 2014. The money was issued in 2015. Other districts, if you look at theirs, you'll see a comparison slide right now. Their INS rate is high. And if you look at their financial statements, they're issuing debt every 2 years, right? We only have one outstanding loan. So the next slide, we're going to move on to the revenue. So the budget is comprised of two parts: money coming in, revenue; money going out, expenditures. So we're going to start off with this, and there's four big pieces that pretty much generate the revenues, which is state funding, students, tax rates, and property values. So I'm going to briefly cover every single one of those in the upcoming slides. On the next slide, state funding. Here, this is probably the most important slide of tonight. The session is still in place right now. So based on everything that's been said, everything can change tomorrow. Everything may change on the last day. I do not know what the state will finally decide to do. There are a couple bills here that I noted that are out there. So SB1 and HB2, these are fully funding HB3 from the last session, and they're not changing the basic allotment, right? What does that mean? That means we're not getting more money per kid. The basic allotment is staying the same for the next 2 years. The next two, SB 1536 and HB 1525, they're trying to clean up HB3, and there's changes to it. The biggest one that would affect this would be the one that's noted: possible changes to the small and mid-sized adjustment and to CT funding. The way CT funding was written with HB3, remember I mentioned you have the basic allotment and then you have the CT multiplier. That's the way the CT funding is set. But there's an adjustment for a smaller mid-sized school district, which we are. So what this bill would do would be the basic allotment times the multiplier for the small and mid-sized adjustment allotment times the multiplier for the CT. So we can potentially get a little bit more funding for CT students because they're funding us at a little bit of a higher level. There's another bill, HB 3445. This is a fund balance bill. Pretty much what they're trying to do is say you can't have a huge amount of fund balance. Initially, it was filed where it was requiring districts to use unobligated fund balance in excess of 110 days. And if you read what it says, look at the way it was written. It says to pay down debt, right? Why? Because a lot of districts just find it easy to just issue debt, let taxpayers pay for it, and then I'm just gonna sit on my fund balance. So that's kind of what the purpose of this bill was, because they pay down debt, lower the M&L rate, or provide increases in pay, or pay for deferred maintenance, right? What happens? It's easy to defer maintenance and not fix things, and then I need a lot of money and I issue bonded debt, right? It's easy to kick it down the can. That's kind of what, kick the can down the road. That's kind of what this bill is trying to do. But the last update I saw, it didn't have a lot of backers, which is why you see the note there that the committee substitute increased it to 180 days. And it sounds like this bill may not make it through, but this part of the bill, they still have the chance to put that language and tie it into another bill that may still be alive. The next line has to do with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, which is the American Rescue Plan. And it looks like these will be appropriated outside of the state's biennial budget. On the next slide, ARP, the American Rescue Plan, this is the third stimulus. So remember, there's been 3 stimulus packages. The first one was the CARES Act, which we got and we included last June when we presented the budget. The second stimulus package that was approved last December. That money still has not been released. That's ESSER 2. This American Rescue Plan Act, this is the third stimulus package that was recently approved through this current president. And so the state of Texas got about $11.2 billion. There's a press release just last month, April 28th. So all the information is still very, very new. The allocation amount that we got was huge. So for ESSER 1, to put that into perspective, we got about $1.6 million. ESSER 3, our allocation is $15.6 million. That's the difference in the size of the stimulus packages when you compare ESSER 1 versus this new ARP. Just this week, we had a first meeting to kind of begin looking at how to spend that money. And then the plan is to bring that plan back to this board, because there's a lot of assurances needed with this application. One of them being we have to have community and stakeholder input, so we'll be having public meetings. Another one being we have to present the information to the board. There's a couple of, on the FAQs, there's a couple of items where they're really, really wanting us to make sure that boards understand that this money is one time, because there is a lot of leeway. We're able to supplant and we're able to pay for things that we could have used our general funds for, right? So what TA is really pushing on is us communicating the message to everybody that just because you get this money doesn't mean you can just supplant. And in 4 years, when you're out of money, you're in a huge hole, right? Because you ran out of money. So I'll share those FAQs at the next meeting so y'all can see the specific language of them. And then here on the next slide, here you'll see the tentative budget that I kind of developed and released to the group. It's split up across seven different areas. There is a requirement for that we reserve 20% of the money to address the loss in learning. The $4 million budget amounts to about 25% of the money, so we're reserving a little bit more. There's about another $4 million being reserved for the integration of technology. Part of the money says, should COVID closures come back, how are you going to address distance learning, right? You need more bandwidth, you need more servers, you need more devices. So you see a big amount of money there. Professional development, got about $250,000. And then you have family and community engagement with about another $250,000. Safe to return in person and continuity of services. This one, we budgeted a little bit less, about $1.5 million, because remember, we are open already. A lot of things you see, the decals, the plexiglasses, the buildings have already kind of been equipped. We used a lot of ESSER 1 money for that. Remember the needle bipolar isolation we added to the HVACs is about $350,000 to kind of clean the air. This ARP money, ESSER 3, allows for that. But since we already did it, the grant allows for pre-award costs back to last March. So that is one item where I'm going to hope to kind of say, hey, we already did it. Can I charge this grant for it and then kind of bring the money back to have extra surplus bond funds. And then the last one becomes grant administration, right? So we have indirect costs, which amount to about $2 million, and then the difference is $3 million. The plan is to see what we can supplant about $1 million a year, because this is a 3-year grant. And that $1 million a year is very similar to what we did with ESSER 1, which I'll get to right now. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is if I can move money up into the ESSER grants, save the money in the 199 money, our general fund, but it's a one-time savings, right? It's because we still have recurring costs. And so that one-time savings either increases the fund balance or the money can be used to fund one-time projects.
Survento,
Yes.
I wanted to add, so just as Survento has indicated, for these funds here, we did bring our leadership team together. There's well over 30 folks in that group. And we were split up into groups. I'd like to thank the planning and instruction team. I believe it's Ana Alvarez and Ms. Georgina Diaz, Ms. Frescas, all of the team. And we were mixed up into groups virtually. And we had time frame, and the information was provided ahead of time for the entire group so that they could read up on information and what was allowable. So we gathered a lot of ideas of where we need to go. I know that I have a pending meeting that we're going to try to get with our parents. So we're going to have Flora set that up. And I know that we will follow the process of also bringing our DAC team. So it's going to be a well-vetted strategic plan with input, just so you're aware on these funds. Thank you.
Mr. Lorenzo, I have a question. On mental health and behavioral supports and professional development, some of the ESSER grant can be used towards those, correct?
Yes. And so one of the other requirements, there's two. One of them is to address the loss of money, right? That requires a minimum set aside of 20%. The next one kind of becomes to prioritize and target the mental health and social well-being of those students most disproportionately affected, meaning your ESL kids, your bilingual kids, your migrant students, homeless students. So in the planning, in the grant, we can't just say we're going to open up after-school tutoring for everybody. We're going to open after-school tutoring up for everybody, but for these specific types of student pops, we're doing more. We're targeting them first because in theory, they got affected worse than a regular education student. So yes, it is allowed, and it is a full. This next one, state funding here, this is a basic allotment. And so here, this is a slide that I've shared before. I like to include several years because that's how you see trends, right? So the state funds school districts on a biennium basis, which means that it's for 2 years. And so the current biennium that they're working on, well, the current legislative session is going to pay for the upcoming biennium, which is the last 2 columns, right? Year 21, 22, and year 22, 23. Right now, we're on year 2021. So if you go back to 2009-10, this was right after the Great Recession, you'll see how the basic allotment stayed the same for 4 years, 47.65, and then it went up for 2, and then it stayed the same again at 51.40 for 4, and then it went up, and it's going to stay the same for another 4 years, right? So this just kind of shows you, looks like the state increases funding to school districts once, and then it stays the same for 4 years, and then it's increased and it stays the same for 4 years. This next one, here's where I wish Christine was here because this is where the interesting slides begin.
We will let her know it's Survento.
Thank you. Here's where all the numbers get fun, right? So there's 2 enrollment comparisons that I do. The first one is the enrollment change from snapshot, which is the last Saturday in October to the end of the year. Right, so that pretty much shows you what happens from October to the end of the year. And then the bottom one is what happens from the end of the year to the following October. So then you see the top table in the year 1819. Within that time, within that snapshot, within that time frame, we lost 109 kids. Following year, we lost 51 kids. The following year, we actually gained 10 kids during the school year. That's this year. The second table shows you the change from the end of the year, once school's out in June, to the following October, right? And so the little arrows kind of show you the way the way the addition and subtraction work on here. So, here under 1819, we lost 60 kids, then we lost 120 kids, and we lost 192 kids. This is essentially the loss of students during the summer. So at the very bottom, you see the calculation. I took the current enrollment as to when I did this presentation, which was April 19th. And then so I'm taking the 3-year average for both. So the 3-year average of the number of kids we lose in the summer is 124. 3-year average for the number of kids we lose during the year is essentially 50. So by the end of next year, we're probably going to be at 3,000 students. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I've been wrong every year, but we haven't yet. We continue to lose students. All districts, there's another slide I have, I didn't include it here. All districts with the exception of Panetheo and Socorro are losing students. Those 2 districts, if you look at what's going on there, they have a living. So as people move, all new homes are within Socorro and Panetheo, they're seeing the students. And then nationally, there's a decline in births in this country. I think we finally dipped below 2, which is 2, I guess having 2 kids. I think we're at 1.7, and you want to be at a target of 2. So there's just less students in the country. This next slide shows you the same enrollment trend on a graph. So I said on the previous slide that by the end of next year, we'll probably be at 3,000 students. If you look at the year 2011-12, which is the last year we had an increase, we lost 1,000 kids, right? So I guess the point of this graph is to show, yes, we keep losing kids, doesn't mean we're broke. As you'll see later on, we've given pay raises every single year. We have not implemented a RIF. We have one of the lower tax rates in the area. So we're not broke. Every year we just make changes to kind of rebalance the budget. We can't have the same number of teachers that we had in 2011-12, right? We could not sustain the teachers we had and the staff we had when we had 1,000 more kids versus what we have now. So this just kind of shows you we're continuing to lose students, but hey, no need to ring the bell yet, right? Because as you'll see later on, we are bringing changes to kind of balance the budget for the fall. This next slide shows you the 2 different types of tax rates that there is. I alluded to these earlier. The blue one essentially becomes the bigger portion, the maintenance and operations, and it pretty much funds your day-to-day stuff. It funds lights in the building, utilities, supplies, transportation, teacher salaries, anything that is day-to-day is funded through the M&O part of the tax rate. And then the INS rate, interest and sinking, that funds the bond that we have. This next slide shows you a comparison between us and all the I.S.Ds in the area. So we're second lowest. We were second lowest last year. Anthony beat me by 1 penny. But look at the red part. This is the bonded debt part, right? We're on the lower end. We have the smallest bonded debt tax rate of the entire area. That is awesome. That is great news, because guess what's going to happen in hopefully within the next 10, 15 years? So Carl's going to run out of space. It's going to jump over to Clint and it's going to jump over to Sun Alley, right? So what does that mean? We eventually may need more schools, more buildings. And so by having such a low INS rate, you'll have space in 10 to 15 years to issue debt to renovate or construct new buildings. So long-term strategically, we're in a good spot compared to, look at some of the big ones. I mean, Fordino, 46 cents, Isleta, 39 cents, Clint, 34, Socorro, 39. They're all taxing 2 to 2.5 times more than we are for buildings. The next slide kind of shows our history. This is only Sun Alley. And then you'll see the first year is 14, 15, and then the following year is when the tax rate increased significantly, and that was because of the bond that was approved. And then you kind of see, at that point, you can see the red part kind of stays the same. And then it took an increase in 2021. So what happened is when the bonds were issued, they were issued at a premium, meaning we got more cash up front than than the amount of the bond. And because the construction budget didn't require that extra $1.6 million in construction proceeds, because as you'll see under the monthly bond update, we're still spending money on projects after we already completed all the original things, right? So with that surplus in cash on day one, what we did with it is we transferred it into the INS rate, into the INS fund, the debt service. And that kind of kept the INS rate from going up too high for those couple of years. So that's why you were able to see a decrease from 0.1374 to 0.1174, and it kind of stayed the same. And then it's now that I'm running out of the surplus there, now the INS rate is going up. So instead of spending money on projects we didn't need at that point, we were able to keep our INS rate lower by essentially capitalizing that interest. The beauty here too is for the last two columns, this is HB3. Remember earlier I mentioned the MCR, the maximum compress rate, and I mentioned that the state is compressing tax rates statewide. They're trying to get everybody within 10%, right? So what they're doing is they're compressing the M&O portion, the blue portion. So as that number goes down, and I keep losing students, right? So I have to increase my effort for the EDA. So as the M&O is compressed by the state, and I need more money on the EDA, the goal is to try to match those two. Right? So we won't be actually increasing the tax rate. We're keeping the same tax rate because the state is lowering the M&O, but we need more on the INS. So instead of decreasing two and essentially what we're doing, instead of decreasing two and having to increase two, we're netting out at zero. Where another district may actually be increasing the INS side. This next slide, property values. This is the appraised values. And I mean, look at the column, look at the last column, 2021, huge rise in appraised values. The appraisers, when they issue out these values, they come out and they visit, or this year the visit was virtual. Pretty much said in previous years, normally you want to have 6 months worth of inventory of homes to sell. In previous years, we were at about 3 for the El Paso County area. Right now, the average time is about 30 days. The home is being flipped within 30 days, which is why it's all over the news. Prices just go up, appraisals go up, and then you bring in the whole supply line change issues because of COVID. You bring in tariffs because of, I think there was a tariff that was placed on Canadian lumber. So prices of lumber just went up. People saying at home, you go to Home Depot,
There's
everything.
a 2x4 costs you about $15, $16 right now. So it's way high. I know the houses in Horizon, some of them have stopped building because the lumber is so expensive. A house that was 135,000 maybe right now is 202,000. So.
And that's the value we got. That's why you see here a steady incline, and then suddenly for this year it just skyrocketed. So that's the first half of the budget, right? The second half becomes allocating expenditures. So as I mentioned under the revenues, we have less kids and the state's not increasing funding, right? That pretty much says everything. We have less kids and the state's funding us the same. So if we want to do anything, we have to find the money in-house. There's 4 areas here: starting point, budget details, compensations, benefits, and other items. And so I'll kind of get into every single one of those groups in the upcoming slides. So for the first part, moving forward for next year, we got to know what we have now, right? Which becomes the 2021 amended budget. And then I'm going to kind of explain the difference between something that's budgeted versus what actually happened. And then kind of show some scenarios as to how we get from point A to point B if we do this or don't do that. So this slide, 2020-21 amended budget. Here you'll see our current budget right now only for Fund 199. I am not including the food service fund. Here you see the biggest object They're broken down by object codes for the revenues. And I listed the biggest ones. You'll see at the very last one, it says all other remaining categories combined. I lumped everything else that didn't fall into one of the top four. So look at the biggest one with 83% of the money. This is the per capita and foundation school program. Per capita means funding per student. And the foundation school program is where I mentioned tier one and the basic allotment. Essentially, that's where 83% of our money comes in. Most of our money comes in through there. Second biggest chunk is local real and personal property taxes. This is tax collections. It's about 7%. We have to have a tax rate to be able to participate in the foundation school program. And so that becomes the second biggest chunk. And then you have a couple of other small categories that account for the last 10%, right? So overall, we have about $35.8 million budgeted in this year's budget. On the bottom, you see the object code categories for expenditures. Biggest one is 6,100 payroll. About 81% of every dollar is tied to a person. So 83% of the money, 90% if you add in the tax rate collections, 90% of the money is brought in because of kids. 81% of the money goes with them. And then the remaining categories become professional and contracted services. Here you have things like utilities, contracted maintenance and repair, supplies and materials. You have supplies, technology items, fuel, other operating. Your 6,400 here. You have things like travel, things like buying food, debt service. Here we have an IFA bond, which will pay off this year, and then capital outlay. Here's biggest chunk of that is actually the Pathway of Champions project, $205,000. So we have about $35.2 million budgeted in expenditures right now. There's a surplus, right? Surplus is because of ESSER 1. So we supplanted about $1 million into ESSER 1, and that's why we have a surplus, which at the end of this year, depending on what the state does with ESSER 2, we should finish the year top in the green, which will get us to the last part of the presentation later on, which is all the other projects that we have in mind. On the next slide, same data, it's just in a graph form. There's people who like to see the numbers, people who prefer graphs. And I did a pie, right? Students bring in the biggest piece of the pie, and that's take the biggest piece of the pie out. Essentially, can't cut supplies and balance the budget. As the district gets smaller and I have less kids, we have to look at staffing. So it's kind of what the point of this one is. Next slide, budget versus actual. There is, in the monthly financial reports that are submitted to the board, there's this exhibit G1. Essentially what this is the budget. And so there's one column that says the original budget. That is the budget that gets adopted by the board. And then the final budget becomes the amended budget, right? So every time I bring a budget amendment, you can compare the original to the final on this schedule. So every time there's a budget amendment, you'll see the change reflected on the final column. That's the amended column. And then the actual amount is actually what happens. If you recall, for the Pathway of Champions project, there was a lot of agenda items, and one of them said, I need to amend the budget to get the projects going now. And then we need to commit the money from the fund balance, because at the end of June, I may not have spent all of it. I budgeted $205,000. I won't spend all $205,000 by the end of June. I may get $75,000, right? So you'll see that under the actual. And then so next year I would budget the difference, which is why that item to commit the money from fund balance was presented, so that I can budget the difference in the following year. So that kind of shows you the difference between budget and actual. Budget is what we plan to happen. Actual is what actually happened. And the difference becomes the swing in fund balance. So if we planned and we got more than we planned for in terms of money coming in, we may see an increase in fund balance. And I say may because we're going to go to the next slide, and here you're going to see some examples as to how that works. If I budgeted for 3,000 students when actual enrollment was only 2,500, I'm actually going to earn less money than what I budgeted for. And then the next example is the opposite, right? If I budgeted for 3,000 students and I actually had 3,500 students, I'm actually going to earn more money than what was budgeted for. And so there you see some examples. So more actual expenditures may be offset by more actual revenues. Less actual expenditures may be offset by less actual revenues and whatnot. The bottom one shows you something similar, but for expenses, right? So if I budgeted $100,000 in substitute costs, but I actually spent $125,000, then we spent more than we budgeted for. And then the same example in the opposite, if we actually spent less than we budgeted for in substitute costs, then we, in theory, can save money, assuming the revenues come in, right? So you got to look at both sides together. Just because we save money on the expenses doesn't mean that we actually are going to get more money back at the end of the year. We'll get more money back at the end of the year by saving money on expenses if the revenues came in where they needed to. If they come in less, then we're breaking even. If I spent more and I brought in less, I'm in a big hole. So we got to look at both revenues and expenses together. Another example of budget versus actual, there's a term in education, they use sight words in kindergarten and first grade to kind of teach kids how to read, right? So I call this sight numbers. So declining enrollment, arrow pointing down means I have less funding, right? So the example I give, remember the basic allotment, 6,160? It's not going to change. So I have 100 students, right? They lose 100 kids. At that amount, I just lost $616,000 off the bat, right, during the summer. So what does that mean? You know, people think, oh, it's a huge number, but what does it actually pay for? So later on, you'll see the TASB recommendation. TASB came in earlier this year. They did a pay study. So the total cost of that pay study, which is a 2% raise plus equity adjustments, was $584,000. So if I lose an extra 100 kids that I don't want to lose, suddenly that TASB, I can't afford that, right? Look at electricity costs for fiscal year 19. I use fiscal year 19 because that was pre-COVID. That's the last full year I had with data. $612,000. So for every 100 kids I lose, that pays electricity for a whole year. Finally, $403,000 for substitute costs in fiscal year 19. On the next slide, you'll see another comparison, budget versus actual, and this pretty much shows student drive funding. I did a similar table like this when we did the District of Innovation planning and the informational sessions. So up top, the way to read this, you're going to see 3 different classrooms, right? Number of students, 22, 17, and 12. So the next row is one classroom, 111, funding per student 6160. So you multiply the 22 students times the 6160. That one class is generating $135,000. Class with 17 students is generating $104,000. Class with 12 students is generating $73,000. The average cost of a teacher, and by average cost, I use midpoint, the 13 years on our pay table plus the benefits, assuming they want health insurance. So you back that out, and for the 3 different classrooms, you see how much extra money there is, right? So the one classroom at the max at 22 students is leaving $66,000 on the table to pay for everything else. Pay for buses, pay for athletics, pay for utilities, it's paying for supplies versus a class of 12 students, leaving $4,490. So Core I.S.D actually has a regulation that pretty much says that's the number they use, 12, any class below 12 students requires superintendent and cabinet approval, right? Why? Because that's your break-even number, right? So if you have 12 kids in the classroom, that classroom is really paying for the teacher itself versus a class of 22 students. Example number 2 is the same thing, but it shows you if you have 10 classrooms. So if I had 10 classrooms of 22 students versus 10 classrooms at 12 students, that class with the 10 classrooms with 22 students is generating $1.3 million of revenues. The 10 classrooms with 12 students is generating $739,000. So once you back out the cost of the 10 teachers, same thing, right? The 10 classrooms are leaving $660,000 on the table versus $44,000 on the table for the 10 classrooms with 12 students, and that pretty much pays for everything. I said everything that's left. Just kind of what that note is down there. Anything that is not the teacher's salary is paid for from what's left over. So essentially, students drive the funding, right? Declining enrollment means less money. Declining enrollment means I have less funding for staffing. Declining enrollment means I have less money for supplies. Declining enrollment means I have less money for pay raises. This next section, hypothetical scenarios. Here, what I did here, I pulled the actual 2020-21 budget that we have right now that I presented earlier, and it just show what the effect is, right? So if nothing changes at all, if we take our existing budget right now, and nothing changes and I lose 100 kids, you see the effect, right? Negative $616,000. So then your total revenues go from 35,813 to 35,197. No change on the expenditures, right? This is hypothetical. This assumes only a change in the students. So look at what happens to the difference between revenues and expenditures. Lose 100 kids, don't do anything. We're suddenly no. Our surplus is gone, just like that. On the next slide, you see a difference there. What if we don't lose kids, right? But what if we decide to give that TASB pay raise of $584,000? We would be increasing our payroll costs, which are recurring costs, by $584,000, and just like that, our surplus is gone as well. We would still have a balanced budget, but we no longer have a surplus. So look at what happens on the next slide. What if both of those things happen, right? What if we lose 100 kids, which is the $616,000, and we give a pay raise? Suddenly we go from having a surplus to being balanced, to actually being in the hole, right? Because you're having to do both now. You're increasing your budget on the expenses, but your budget is less on the revenue side. So it's a double whammy. And then, so if this happens, if we lose 100 kids, we take our budget now and then we lose 100 kids and give a pay raise, we're starting next year in the hole. And then if we do that for 2 years in a row, which is the next slide, the numbers just multiply, right? Because you have 1 year and then you're adding another year by doing the same thing. So suddenly we're in a deeper hole if we don't essentially do anything. With only those two examples of these. This next section, here I actually jump into the details of the budget. So it'll be a snapshot and then kind of recap on organizations and then recap on the TASB staffing report. And then it kind of ties into what the draft budget for next year looks like right now, assuming those items that are covered stay in play with this budget. So the budget snapshot. A brief recap on last year, 1920. And I'm bringing this in because of ESSER 2. ESSER 2 has not been allocated, and pretty much this is what happened with ESSER 1, right? We actually earned $31.4 million in funding. And then COVID came in March and the state closed schools and said, oh, we're gonna hold you harmless. You close, you're gonna get fully funded. Yes, we got fully funded, but not with state money. We got fully funded with state and federal money, which is the blue and the yellow. So we should have earned 31.4 million in state money. We actually only got $29.7 million in state money. And we got, the state gave us a difference of 1.6 million with ESSER 1. And you'll see there a note on the grant periods, and then a summary at the bottom. Pretty much I used $1.1 million in recurring payroll costs because the grant allowed supplanting. And then there's about $350,000 in one-time costs. That's where you see a lot of the preparations when you walk in, the thermometers that pick up your temperature and identify whether you're wearing a mask. A lot of that was paid through this money, and then we have indirect costs. So I go back to this because the session is not over, because they have until May 31st to decide what's going to happen with funding. For all I know, they do the same thing with ESSER 2, and they say, hey, we're going to give you ESSER 2 money, and we're going to not give you all your 199 money, just like they did last year. Hoping it's not the case, right? So we can actually keep our 199 surplus, but in the event that they do, we may not have a 199 surplus, so it's still a disclaimer. Next slide. So what I tried to do here is show you we have our current budget and then trying to get to what I call the estimated operating budget, right? That's kind of, we have the budget and then I'm not gonna amend it every time there is a change. It would be way too many amendments every time there is a single change, right? So every year there's money left over. And so what I do here is the estimated operating budget is what I think we're gonna end up with for next year, right? So the biggest change here that I'm picking up right now is just a change in the ESER one, the indirect costs. But this was done right before ESER three was announced, so we're actually gonna get a little bit more in indirect costs from ESER three, so that's probably gonna go away. On the expenditure side, excuse me, on the expenditure side, you see the $1 million that I mentioned, your payroll costs that I supplanted with ESER one costs. And then you see one-time costs right now, like we paid for the TASB reviews, we had a cybersecurity audit, we upgraded our telephones. Those are one-time costs, right? We're not gonna incur them next year, so we can kind of reduce them just to kind of get to what we're estimating next year's gonna be. And then there's one-time equipment costs as well, and then the one-time 205 of the pathway chapters, that's also one time, right? So if you kind of take our amended budget and you make some of those adjustments, that truly, the estimated operating budget, that's kind of where we stand right now. Because of ESER, we were able to have a surplus budget, which is a $580,000. If we didn't have ESER, we'd probably be running a negative budget of $318,000 budgeted, not really becoming actual. And so what you're going to see now is this column is going to flow to the next slide. And then so for expenditures, the biggest dollar change becomes staffing. Like I've mentioned, kids bring in most of the money, adults take most of the money, employees do. So there's about $944,000 worth of costs that we can reduce our budget by. I'll mention some of those positions on a later slide. And so that would essentially reduce the operating budget by a significant amount. And if you look at the net effect at the very bottom, what happens, our negative budget right now would actually become a surplus if we don't fill all of these positions that may have become vacant, but get $944,000 back. So on the next slide, for the organization profiles, here I detailed kind of where the cuts were. Like I mentioned before, every single campus saw a decrease in funding. Overall, their funding increased by $40,000, but the per pupil funding for the basic allotment was reduced by $10 per kid, right? So I actually cut their general fund by $53,000. That's I can do anything kind of money. I can pay for pea supplies. I can do anything I want with that part of money. That's their goal, right? That's the one they don't want to use until the end. So they actually did see a cut there. Overall, their budgets increased because of the next note. State comp ed budgets were increased because of the way HB3 changed funding. It used to be at-risk counts, now it's economically disadvantaged counts. And because of changes in the way the enrollments were, they actually got more money for the special POPs, but they did get less money in the general fund. Department budgets decreased by $29,000. It actually would have been a bigger decrease, but we did add $23,000 to our student information system to add a module essentially for nursing. This is a recurring cost. So had we not added that module, the savings would have been closer to $50,000. Overall, and then funding for district level budgets, right? There are certain budgets that departments have, and there's budgets that I control, utilities, some of the one-time costs. I budget for those separately, right? Otherwise, it would look like if we increased technology's budget by the cost of the cyber security audit, it would look like, oh, we increased them by 30 and we decreased them by 30, right? If it's or HR with the two TASB, the staffing and the pay studies, it would look like we gave HR $20,000 and then took $20,000 from HR. So I budget for those costs separately under district level allocated budgets. There, the biggest decrease was $146,000 because the new comps grant that the county was awarded. So essentially, we were paying 100% of the cost for the two SROs. For the next 3 years, we're paying 75% of the cost, and I think it kicks back up to 100% of the cost on year. On the next slide, here is the detail for the payroll budgets, right? So positions not filled during this school year included all of those, included principal at Zambrano, the principal at Loya essentially picked up both schools, 8 teacher positions, 2 teacher aide positions, 1 library aide, 2 attendance clerks, 1 receptionist, 1 RN, nurse, 1 monitor, and 1 crossing guard. These are the positions that affected the general fund. As you'll see later on, there's other positions listed like a campus instructional specialist. I am not including that here because they were funded through federal money, right? So here's only actually impacted the general fund. And then ABC, it continues to help. So thank you very much for that. Last year after ABC, remember what happened with ABC? We had 3 campuses with the same grade levels. So we were split 3 ways. ABC changed the grade levels, and now we only have 2 campuses with duplicate grade levels. So essentially, instead of having 2 teachers, 2 teachers, and 2 teachers, now we may have 4 teachers, right? So that saved teachers last year, and it's going to save teachers again for next year because we have less kids. So by not being spread as thin, ABC will continue to pay off. And so as the note says, there is a total of 10 teachers that I am projecting for next year that we're going to have a surplus. This assumes, and this estimate was based on assuming that every kid comes back. Essentially what I did, because I don't know whether it's a first grader or second grader or third grader, I don't know who's going to leave. So I take every student that we have now, I move them up a grade level. And then I had 10 surplus teachers because of ABC. Now, this is where the second note comes in, the DOI. There are, out of 10 of those, 3 of those are due to the DOI increasing the limit to 24 from 22. So for first grade mono, there would be 3 sections at 24. Guess what? If 6 of those kids don't come back, then none of them exceed 22. So the 10 teachers that I'm projecting is assuming every kid comes back, but I know that not every kid is going to come back. I just don't know where they're going. So at the moment, if every one of those students comes back, those sections noted would be the classes that do exceed 22 students in K through. That's the last note. These projections assume that all current students return. And then there's a big note there too on the bottom for pre-K and kinder. Because of COVID, a lot of kids just didn't show up this year, right? So you don't know what those numbers will be. Pre-K and kinder becomes a good estimator because they're replenishing your ranks. If you have less and less kinder kids, guess what? Eventually you're gonna have less first graders, less second graders, less third graders. So that is the indicator. Pre-K and kinder. If you have smaller classes there, get ready because you need smaller classes throughout the rest of the school year pattern. On the next slide, stipends. There is a decrease of about $31,000 being projected. And this is because we have less teachers, right? So if I have less teachers in the bilingual section, I'm not paying that bilingual stipend. But if I still have the bilingual student, then I may need to spend more on bilingual supplies, right? Which kind of goes back to the previous note as to even though I decreased campus general fund dollars, they got more money because of the mandated spending. And then there's a note on the bottom for, we are proposing a new stipend for mariachi for the middle school at $1,500. And then there's about $2,000 for 2 elementary schools, $1,000 for each to kind of help build the mariachi program. And then another note, another change that you will see would be changes to career and technology student organizations. There's a change in some of the names, some of the programs offered, so that schedule is actually just being updated.
I have a question.
Yes.
For our next budget meeting, can I have the last time the bilingual teachers got a stipend? How long of years has it been since they've got an increase in their stipend? Okay.
we'll get you the number, but it's been a while.
Yes,
It
it has
has,
more than 10 years.
yes. I pretty agree with that. I think it's always been 25 since I've been here. I think I've been here for like 8 or 9. So. This next one, I'm going to jump into the staffing report. So we paid TASB $10,000 to come out here and kind of review our staffing, compare us to other districts, tell us where we're overstaffed, where we're understaffed, and kind of what the cost savings would be if we implemented some of those changes. So this is from their report, their recap table. And so the following slides, what they do is they look at each one of these groups and kind of tell you what we've done or haven't done. And remember, we have not implemented a reduction in force, so any changes that do take place, they take place via attrition. So if somebody leaves, position becomes open, that's when the position gets evaluated. So this first one for administrative and professional for that group, TASB was recommending the absorption of 2 P&I professional staff and 1 librarian. We have not had any attrition in those 3 spots, but there is a note regarding the librarian. So when TASB did the report, we had 6 librarians and 1 librarian. So the middle school had a library and a librarian. Everybody else only had a librarian. So TASB was actually recommending that we cut the librarian and place a library in place of the librarian at Loya. But because an instructional aide position became open at the middle school, the library was instead moved to that position. Essentially, we had 7 people, right? And TASB was saying we're over 1. We essentially moved that 1 person over into an instructional aide. So we didn't get the full cost of a librarian, but we saved the cost of a librarian. This next slide is for campus clerical positions. They were recommending absorption of 1 campus clerical position and 7 non-campus clerical positions. So essentially prior to the report, we had, there were 2 positions that were absorbed for the attendance clerks via attrition, 1 at Loya and 1 at Allotment. Every campus had 1. And then the Loya one became vacant, but because it became the smallest school at less than 200 kids, that position was not open, right? Because it was unfair for Alarcon, Loya, and Borrego, who had twice or even 3 times as many kids and only 3 front office people, to be staffed the same as Loya, which had less than 200 kids with 3 front office people, right? So Loya ended up with 2. Another position became vacant, and essentially what we did was we ended up moving an existing person into the vacancy at the high school. And so you kind of see what the change happened, the change became. The secretary and the registrar essentially assumed the duties of the attendance clerks. So there was no attendance clerk at Loya right at the end of last year because of ABC. And then this year there were 2 more, Alarcon and Borrego, who also tentatively do not have 2 attendance clerks either. So the attendance clerks remain at Zambrano, which is the biggest school with the elementary school with about 600 kids, and then the middle school and the high school, which is where you have actual class periods versus taking attendance 1 time at the elementary level. This next group, the absorption of 7 non-campus clerical positions. So here we've made progress on some of these. I know when I first started, P&I had 2 secretaries and 1 clerk. We're down to 1 secretary now. HR had, I think, 2 or 3 more staff members than they do now. Finance, it used to be finance and research and development, who had an executive director, a professional specialist, and a secretary. They were all pretty much, the secretary was moved to a vacancy, and these 2, the executive director and the professional specialists, were 2 became 1. They became my federal and state programs coordinator when the previous superintendent restructured. So here you kind of see what's happened here in this building. So when the second P&I secretary left last year, athletics actually fell under finance. My secretary picked up the athletics budget entry. And then, so P&I started the year with 1 secretary who left this year, and that created a vacancy. And because TASB was saying that we are overstaffed in these positions, we essentially reclassed the receptionist into the P&I secretary, and then an HR assistant assumed the secretary duties for HR. So essentially now the receptionist area is picked up by the 4 remaining secretaries in this building, which is superintendent secretary, P&I, finance, and HR. There's all 4 of them assume these duties. On this next slide, here they were recommending absorption of 16 educational aides. Very high number. Part of the issue there had to do with the funding. HB3 gave the early education allotment, which was we were able to use the money to put an aide inside every single pre-K class because they were recommending a ratio of 11:1. So when you have 22 students, the teacher and the aide get you to 11:1, right? So that number is high because they don't consider the funding, they just consider the FTEs. So here you see kind of the notes as to the other positions that have happened, vacancies that have happened that we have changed. And then because of HB3, I mentioned earlier that we have less pre-K and kinder kids that came back because of COVID. We got less funding in the early education allotment. And because a lot of these aides were funded through there, as the positions became vacant, we just did not fill them because we were not generating that money anymore because we had less kids at the lower. Excuse me. The next slide is absorption of teachers. We worked on a report not too long ago showing all the teachers that have left. Every organization goes through this. El Paso I.S.D. If you actually look at their budget, they show all the orgs and then the costs, right? So they budget for vacancies and turnover on day 1, which is very, it's a tough position to be in, right? Because if on day 1 you're reducing your budget by $500,000, you better hope you get that $500,000 in savings. Otherwise, right, we're not doing that. We're not budgeting that lapse in salary on day 1, which means at the end of the year, if all things go well, then I actually get that money back as a savings versus I have the hope that I do get the lapse salaries. And teacher groups, that is the position that we have the most employees in because we do provide instruction. So here you'll see every year we lose a lot of teachers. If you go back to your budget amendments and if you look at the very first budget this year, you look at last year's budget adoption, there was 8, when I brought the budget adoption in June, we had 8 surplus teachers at that point, which were the 8 that I budgeted in as through 1. By the time school started, I actually didn't have those 8 anymore. They had already left. And we didn't need to fill them. So here, this slide kind of shows you all the positions that we have absorbed within those 2 fiscal years. That was prior to the TASB report, and subsequent to the TASB report, there's actually been more, and there's going to be more between here and June, and there's going to be more between here and the start of school. Because it is the number with the most positions, that's going to be the number that has the most turnover. So we will get, if we're able to not fill these positions, you do get savings. Finally, the last recommendation for the auxiliary staff was to add two new custodians, one for the middle school and one for the field house. And you see the note as to how TASB's recommendation is 19,000 square foot per custodian, and we're budgeting that, we're staffing at 20,000. So this one's kind of being evaluated. We did convert one part-time custodian to a full-time custodian at Allotment after the TASB report. On the next slide, you'll see other positions as well that have been absorbed through attrition. Campus instructional specialist at Zamzano. This is one of the ones I mentioned earlier that I didn't assign a cost to it on the general fund because it's funded through title funds. And then we have a bus monitor, a crossing guard, and a literacy instructor. Because we have less kids during the year, less kids to monitor, less kids to actually help with crosswalks, it make no sense to hire positions that we didn't need at the moment, so.
So that might be a position, we would have to open when all the children go back, because I know that intersection on Herring, is where one of the cross guards that essentially left used to stand. Have another one that helps the children off of the bus.
Yeah, so essentially, depending on how many kids come back, then yes, those would be reevaluated in the upcoming school year. And then the literacy instructor, there was 2, now we're only down to 1. At one point, I think we had like 3 or 4. On the next slide, here's other positions that have been absorbed. The RN nurse, because of the ABC project and because of what that did to Loya, essentially we were able to close one RN position and fill it with an internal RN position. So all schools still have an RN or an LVN. Right? All schools still have an RN or an LVN, but we were able to save one school because of the way the numbers fell after ABC. And then the next one too, the principal at Timbrado. So the Loya principal now assumes the duties of schools.
The nurse that's now in the RN position for the district, is she gonna go back to Loya? She wants to, I mean,
Right now, it would be, Ms. Licon, or this is Dr. Chavez. Right now, she's not physically at Loya, however, she does rotate within all the schools.
but when the kids go back,
Again, evaluating the number of students, because we do have Zambrano and so fertility, so both are being in classes.
okay, because we have one, that's presently there, right, it's, forget her name.
She was at the middle school and she moved to the Loya.
Ms. Cortez.
Yeah, you don't want to mention first and last name. Just because we
Okay.
don't want to go.
Yeah,
into
yeah.
it.
But anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the next slide, here you have other positions that are still kind of on hold. They're not closed, which is why you don't see the dollar impact because bus drivers, we don't know how many kids come back, how many routes we're gonna need. There's 2 security guards, same thing there because of COVID and closures, those 2 positions are kind of put on hold. We're also still kind of evaluating and considering what we're gonna do with guest teacher pay and then dual credit stipend amounts now that we're gonna have at early college, high school. And then there is a recommendation for the new stipend for mariachi, so. With that said, the next slide kind of shows you what the budget looks like right now for this year. And we started with the amended budget, we made the changes to Esther, backed out the one-time cost of the Pathway of Champions, and then the positions that were tentatively closed, like the principal for Sombrano, the attendance clerks, the librarian who became an instructional aide, the other RN. So if all those remain closed, then our current estimated operating budget becomes the first column. And then the difference between that column and the next column, which becomes the draft budget for next year, you see on the last column, right? So you'll see how currently we're at about 2.6 in local and intermediate sources for revenue. That is projected to go up to 2.8, which is a difference of about $232,000. The main reason for that is because home appraised values went up, right? So appraised values go up, tax generated is gonna be higher. The next one, state sources, decrease of about $1.6 million, and that is because of two issues. One of them would be, remember the 174 students that I mentioned that we are projecting that we will lose by the end of next year? That's going to come up to about $1 million. And the difference, the $686,000, most of that is going to be because of the IFA bond that I mentioned that gets paid off this year. So the state share, which you'll see if you look down to, it says 6,500 under debt service. The local cost of that IFA bond is $836,000, right? And then so you see for next year, the cost is going to be 0. So the difference between that number and the $686,000 that I'm talking about is the local share. So our local share, we pay for part of that and the state paid for the difference. So that's the second biggest change in the state sources. Under payroll costs, you see a significant change there. And then you see some smaller changes in some of the other areas, which I'm going to jump onto the next slide because that's where I have the explanations for them. So under payroll, the $487,000, that's essentially the net effect of the 10 positions that we're projected to lose for next year. But the state has the TRS and the pension plan, and one of the costs that we have to pay for, anytime there's a session, if the pension is underfunded, they'll pay the pension directly, and then they give us a cost that we have to record on our revenue, on our books. And the good thing is that we get both the revenues and the expenses, so it's a net effect of zero. But if the budget has to go up, then you do see the difference in the payroll costs. And then you see under 6,200, the change is minimal. Under 6,300, most of it is going to be one-time cost. And then under 6,400 here, you see it looks like we're increasing 6,400 a lot. It's not really that we're increasing it a lot from last year. It's because of COVID, right? So because of COVID, a lot of the money that was budgeted for travel for like the CT program, they travel at the end of the year. Because they didn't travel this year, a lot of that money was moved into supplies earlier on in the year. So this just kind of shows you the variances between our current budget versus what the budget looks like for next year. So overall, you can see total revenues, because total revenues are decreasing by about $1.4 million. The plan is to try to decrease total expenditures by about $1 million. The next group is kind of compensation and benefits. And so here I'll cover pay and benefits history, I.S.D's pay plan recommendations, and then the snapshot of the health plan. So like I mentioned earlier on this slide, pay and benefits history, even though we've seen declining enrollment for 10 years now, doesn't mean we're broke. We've made changes every single year. We've cut positions where we can. We cut budgets when we can. And then you give pay raises when you can. And then here you kind of see the history of it. Every year there's been some type of a pay raise, some years more generous than others. Part of it is also driven by state funding, right? So for the 2019-2020 school year, which was last year, that's when HB3 came in, which gave a huge increase into the basic allotment, but said you have to spend a lot of that on pay raises for employees, and you have to focus on teachers, nurses, and librarians, which is why they got about a 5% pay raise compared to the other pay groups. For this last year, in order to be more competitive on that pay group, the board did approve a 4% pay raise for that group, plus any equity adjustments to kind of make this more competitive with the surrounding districts. And then there was smaller increases for the remaining pay tables. So every year there's been some type of a pay raise. The next one shows you what's happened with the health fund. You have two columns. The first column is what the employer does, and the second column is what the employee changes have been. So every year, for the most part, on the employer side, you see some type of activity, right? You see more activity on the employer side than on the employee side, meaning in year 13-14, we increased our monthly contribution per employee into the health fund. And then the following year, we had to transfer a significant amount because the plan was running a deficit. Then you see it again, significant amount, or we're increasing our portion. So that kind of shows you the history. We pumped a lot of money into employees' health insurance. And then on the right, you see what's happened to them. So they don't see too many increases on their premiums, but they have seen changes. So like in the year 16-17, we got rid of the bio plan. And then we've changed insurance carriers a couple times. And then this year, effective this year, at the very bottom, you'll see that there was a $300 employer contribution towards an HSA account for employees who jumped onto consumer-driven plan. So it kind of shows you the history on the health fund. And then these next three slides kind of show you what I.S.D's pay plans are, what they're recommending. Model 1 is the most expensive. It's a pretty much a 2% pay raise for teachers plus equity adjustments. It's increasing, it has the starting salary for teachers at $53,000, and then it shows you the recommended pay increases for the remaining families, the administrative professional, administrative technical, instructional support, and operations support. And then it shows you a total cost estimate of $611,000. That's different from the number I quoted earlier of 584. It's different because their snapshot last October has more employees than what I have going forward for next year. And because their snapshot includes employees from all funding sources, to include all your title and all your federal funds, the number I gave earlier is only your 189. So that's why their number is going to be higher than mine, because the difference is you're not going to get paid because we have less employees, or it's going to be charged to the separate funds. Model 2 on the next page. This is essentially a 1% increase across the board plus equity adjustments. And then TASB only gave us those first two models, and then we asked them to give us the next one, which is Model 3. Was a kind of a hybrid. So what if the board chose only to give teachers a 2% pay raise and equity adjustments and everybody else a 1% pay raise, right? So we felt, okay, everybody gets the 2 with Model 1, the 1 with Model 2, or a hybrid with teachers being the focal point. That's kind of what Model 3 is. On the next slide, here's a snapshot of the health fund. So last year, the health fund ended in a negative deficit position of 1.2 million. So there was a $1.5 million transfer in from the general fund. As of April of 2021, we had about $3.6 million in revenues compared to $3.8 million in expenditures, right? So if you kind of add all that up, the net position is $33,000. It's great that we're in the black, like $33,000, right? And then on the bottom table shows you kind of a comparison between the plans then and the plans now. There was significant changes in the health fund that the board approved this last year. One of them was to add the HSA contribution for the consumer-driven health plan. And then the other one, because we switched the insurance carriers from Cigna to Aetna, they offered this new ACO network. Essentially, it's a limited network. It doesn't let you go to everybody on Aetna's network. It's limited to Las Palmas and the Del Sol. And so this kind of shows you where the employees went. So you did see an increase in the consumer-driven health plan, and then you did see a decrease in total employees enrolled, right? Why? Because we have less employees now, and as costs go up in health insurance, less people also. In speaking to the consultant that you all met last year, Mr. Randy McGraw, he is not recommending an increase to either the employee premium or the employer premium for this upcoming year. He's kind of forecasting that we should kind of stay at 0, maybe possibly build up that net position up a little bit more. But that means that for the following year, we'll have to make some type of an adjustment on either the employee side or the employer, or so that's a good news for the health fund this year. The last group is other items. I leave this at the end because it's kind of a one-time cost. It's if there's money left over, and this is kind of what we try to look at, right? So here you see all the projects that were identified, and we presented them to the board, and we wanted to use all the remaining bond funds for these. And then the first group, the ones in the orange, these were initially approved by the board, but we canceled them because we upgraded the HVAC ventilation system with the filters because of the COVID pandemic. So there's about $334,000 there. Like I mentioned, if I'm able to get that money back through ESSER 3, then suddenly we can pick all those projects up again, right? And then all the items in red is about $1.8 million. There was no funding for these projects, but because we are running a surplus budget, and it's not only a surplus budget, if the state funds the general fund, if we get our state aid and state money, if they make me whole with state money, I'm projecting that we're gonna save money on the expense side. Why? Because our bus fleet is not running the same. We don't have as many, not calling in as many guest teachers. So we are going to save money in the general fund. That should be a good actual swing if if the state finds my revenues at 100% with state money. So if they do, not only will you see this, the current surplus of about $500,000, that surplus may actually go up to about $2 million, assuming I get all my state money with state aid, which means that we should be able to pay for everything else on that list with that swing. Probably have that confirmed, I guess, once SR2 comes out, and then once the state releases near final summer of finances for this year. Those are typically released the first week in September. Because in Texas, as a school district, you can either be a July through June fiscal year, or you can be a September through August fiscal year, right? So we won't know what the final funding looks like. TA does not update that until September, once that September through August group has finished. So by then, should have a very good idea as to what that surplus will actually look like. And then in November is when the audit is essentially presented to the board and it's finalized. And at that point, it's confirmed. So if all goes as hoped, then the plan would be to revisit some of these projects with some of that surplus fund balance. And finally, this last slide is this is part of this budget, right? Part of this the budget hearings that we had, these are costs that kind of came up for additional consideration. So after reducing department budgets, these are things that departments kind of asked for. Hey, we need additional money for this, for that. And so you see a lot of, first one is the Intelligeum at Loya. Now that ABC was implemented, they are empty classrooms at Loya. So a couple of years ago, we had a presentation here, and we presented the idea of creating an Intelligeum type learning environment for the kids. So if this project is listed here, and then you have several other projects. You have a lot of IT projects, right? What did COVID do? It required a lot of new mobile devices, which meant we need more bandwidth. You don't have enough bandwidth, it's the point of having all these devices if nobody can connect and everybody gets frozen. The beauty about SR3 though becomes that I may be able to charge like a lot of those technology items to SR3 because it's to implement instruction, right? Technology because of COVID. So the plan is going to be, let's see how much of this I can charge on to SR3, which means I have a smaller impact on the general fund that we can come back to the board for. There's other items like upgrading marquees at the schools that wouldn't be SR3 eligible. But like the last one, laptops, remember we started the 1-to-1 initiative for incoming freshmen at the high school. Every freshman that came in was going to get a laptop that they would keep for the rest of their high school. That would be eligible under SR3. So that's kind of where we stand with some of these is how much of this can I move into SR3? How much of it is going to get approved? The grant is due mid-July. The submittal for the grant is due mid-July. So by August, I should know what got approved, what did it. And then by September, I would know what our fund balance looks like. So we can come back to the board and say, this is kind of everything else that we need help with. Can we use some of the surplus fund balance to finish the projects on the previous slide and the projects on this slide? So with that said, is there any questions the board may have?
I do. I can go back to the full attendance list for those two positions. Concern with that is, it's under, it's so is the in the information system, so like for that and all those so what does that create? Obviously more working with people with them, but more room for error.
It would, so the basis behind cutting those two was the TASB staffing salary. So on their staffing report, they pretty much, they went by enrollment, right? So they were recommending, based on the size of your school, you don't need 3 clericals, you need 2. That's essentially what it is. But those were TASB's recommendations, right? Those, does not mean we're bound to them. So that is, I guess the decision here is,
There it is. Okay. Yeah.
so if those are 2 positions, I guess the ones for Borrego and Allotment, because the one for Borrego was cut last year. So for the 2 for Borrego and Allotment, I mentioned those are TASB's recommendations. So TASB gave us the template and we kind of tried to follow. At any point in time, if the board feels strongly against any of those cuts, we can add them back. I
Or
think
look
board
into a
decision.
different, or a different option, or look into it, I guess, right? And then it'll be brought to us.
I can add them back, or I guess come up with 2 scenarios so you can see the difference. The difference would be, I think I had earmarked at 36,000 each, so $72,000 would be the difference. So $72,000 to bring 2 of them back, one for Allotment, one and whatever. That's doable based on what I know right now, based on what I know.
Yeah, we can have those 2 scenarios. Are there any other questions or suggestions? Because your input tonight helps us continue to shape the budget without knowing exactly what the legislative session is going to grant us, surprise us with, or scare us. But this is your opportunity to let us know if we're heading in the right direction, what to pay attention to. This is our best aim at where we are, and through discussions and different meetings, and obviously looking at every position, students, we feel hopeful about the things that we are doing. But this is where we need either more guidance or pay attention more here. So any of that guidance at this point would help us. If you're telling us, okay, you're in the right direction. We've made a note on the attendance situation and the bilingual stipends. We've made a note. Anything else that you would like us to pay attention to?
Back to the bilinguals, thank you. My thing is the opposite. Do we still need to use bilingual stipend? I mean, is it needed?
I'm gonna second that with Bernie. How far are we to the dual credit program?
Yes, okay, which one do we want to start first with?
Well-
Blanca, do you want to do the response to the bilingual stipend and then jump into the dual credit?
No, I'm sorry, not the dual credit. Remember, we're gonna do dual language?
Dual language.
So my assumption was that eventually we're gonna phase out the bilingual stipend as it won't be necessary for conducting dual language classes. Or are we gonna allow? So my thing would be there will be no need for bilingual if you have dual language, and then the people that don't want to do dual language, they can go to monolingual. Right?
So I'll have Ms. Cruz address the question on the stipends, and then Dr. Zioba, if you'll come around over to the mic and we'll jump into the dual language.
Okay, so in regards to the bilingual stipend amount, part of the compensation studies included looking at those amounts. They determined that we were very comfortable to other districts. I think there was only one other district that was paying $3,000. So we kind of moved away from considering any increases to the bilingual stipend. But of course, like Mr. Rivas mentioned, these are just recommendations. And the board at any point can say, okay, you look at this. For example, we looked at guest teachers. This year was just very hard to attract those guest teachers, not just in San Luis, in the whole region. So what is it that we want to do? Do something with pay, look at our different options, and maybe we can attract them too.
Yeah, because we have, I know what Mr. Chavez is speaking about, you're talking about like in high school or just across the board, because we have a lot of
Across the
bilingual.
board, there was plan that we're gonna go to dual language, which you said it was being implemented, right?
Which we have, and I can have Dr. Siegel.
Just because we still have a lot of elementary teachers that are just teaching bilingual. So, and that was my concern. I know, one of our educators have been here for a lot of years and hasn't received a, increase in stipend for years.
Yeah, and the stipend, I understand, but I think we're basing that off on the market. So the marketplace, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're pretty high, right?
So they haven't given an increase in those years also? I mean, we're all.
That has remained very steady for all districts. That's pretty much what the market shows right now.
I mean, I personally think we don't have to stay like everyone else. You know, we have a lot of bilingual children here, so. I mean, that's just my opinion.
See, in my,
Just a little bit.
my comment is that when we created the stipend plan, and we're having issues with teachers. But I feel right now we're staff, and I feel like kind of put the demand is not where we're not finding these teachers, and that's the reason those stipends were set up. So my thing now is, let's say we're those teachers bilingual, I would say attrition is stipend. We're not really in need bilingual teachers because we have them. I mean, don't take it away from the ones that are already here. But in the future, I don't think we should continue the stipend.
And just before Dr. Segovia speaks, and that I would say we would have to think about if other neighboring districts are offering the bilingual stipend, that's going to make it very, very hard in terms of recruiting. I know that the year before I arrived to my previous district, they were paying a stipend of like $7,000. That obviously was reduced subsequently. So they made adjustments to that.
That's what we did, like in the signs at one time, we were giving them stipend, and then we were getting. That's what I'm trying.
Dr. Segovia, do you want to speak a little bit on our dual language program, kind of walk us through where we are and where we're headed for next year?
Good evening, Madam President Licon, Board of Trustees, Dr. Mr. Chavez. So yes, we're definitely growing and excited about growing our dual language programs. We're at the lower grades right now. But dual language is part of a bigger umbrella. And so bilingual education is the big umbrella. Dual language is one program within bilingual education. So we're transitioning from late exit bilingual program into a dual language program. So in essence, we're just changing our model. This is the most effective model, the dual language. It is the most effective model for our students, but you still need to have teachers that are bilingual certified. And so we're just switching our instructional model. But again, the switch is a good switch because we are taking advantage of the students' home or native language or first language to build the second language. And so we're at Tamarano and Loya, and we're going to continue to grow each year. We have a top-notch trainer that comes to train our teachers, Dr. Medina. And as a matter of fact, I think this week they have a session for the upcoming teachers that are going to start next school year. But again, bilingual education is the bigger umbrella. Within bilingual education, you do have certain models, dual language being one of them. And again, those teachers are required to be bilingual certified.
Thank you. Ms. Cruz, can you speak a little bit to the high school dual credit, not dual credit, the high school bilingual certification where we've had to have, I know we had to have some staffing be adjusted so that we had additional support for our bilingual learners.
Right, so at the secondary level, it's always hard to recruit teachers that have their ESL supplemental, which is a bilingual certification. So we do see that even now with the stipend, and everybody struggles for those teachers. So to the point that Dr. Segovia is making, dual credit and bilingual is, for terms of the stipend, is the same thing. It is the same funding bucket from the state. So I will say we do still struggle for bilingual teachers.
So if we added a little bit more.
So just so you know, the market value, the median is $2,000. So we're at $2,500. That's not to say we couldn't do better, right? We can always do better.
But I just
So
wanted
we're
you,
not struggling to find.
Well, to that, let me just add that sometimes money is not everything. I think, that's what was my next comment I was gonna bring up to you, Dr. Massachusetts. I think that a good working environment and morale of our employees is very important, and not necessarily you're gonna achieve that just by giving them money. Sometimes money is not gonna be the driving force that helps you retain, good, valuable teachers. We have some really good teachers that stay here, and it's not because of the money. And I know that for a fact. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up to you is that I know it's been difficult, and my first year learning, I was like, I'm going to learn that. And then when I'm like, oh, I'm ready to pounce, we get the pandemic. So,
Pounds away.
yeah. So, but I am going to start, interacting a little bit more. But I think it's very important that, as specifically you as the leader of the district, that we start, addressing those other like mental health concerns for the teachers. Not make them feel comfortable here, make them want to come to work. And one of our teachers love what they do, but more than pay, they need to feel appreciated, and they need to feel that they're supported. And we might be throwing money at a problem that does not require money to solve. That's just my opinion. So
absolutely.
that's a snapshot. I'm only going to look into that. And I know Ms. Cruz is involved, you're involved. So, I do expect something like, I don't know, come up with something. I'm not too sure how you apply it on the teachers, but something that makes them feel appreciated.
Well, absolutely. Actually, I know Ms. Cruz and Dr. Segovia and I and some of our cabinet members, I know Sororacio accompanied us one at a time. We've been on a mission with those cupcakes, and those cupcakes are not funded by district money. In other words, I took it upon myself. I just told the group, hey, let's go. And tomorrow, actually, I give out the last group of cupcakes to our bus drivers. We'll be giving out cupcakes to our bus drivers tomorrow. We did bring out the Craze truck out here, and it's just amazing how our teachers felt. We were out there holding signs. That's where I said that we had the signs upside down, and then you said we want to make it better. We have had discussions about what we can do to increase employee appreciation. Just this afternoon, we went over to our speech pathology group over at Excel and handed them some goodies and personally thanked them. So we've been doing a little bit more of that. And I know there's discussions that Ms. Cruz has already had with Mr. Vivas. And I know that she and I for sure have had the discussions of what we need to do to continue to that effort, what you're saying in terms of employee appreciation, doing a little bit more than that. We've found ourselves even feeling better ourselves by going out to do that. So I absolutely understand what you're saying. And I will tell you, it's just been absolutely amazing how a little cupcake has changed. It makes people smile. I do have to tease Dr. Segovia, because we've been out with these cupcakes and everybody knew where the cupcakes were from, except Dr. Segovia. And he was just amazing how many of our teachers, it just made them smile. They got cupcakes from Gregerson's Cottage. So, so to that point, we're looking into that, and you'll see more coming.
And thank you, because of this music to my ears.
No, that's good. It's because I think it's important to, employees don't feel like we're just trying to get more, because I guess everybody's accustomed to do more with less, and at some point you gotta say this is the line, and we gotta take care of our employees, and not necessarily just monetarily, but make them feel appreciated, make them feel like they're part of our family.
Right, and I know I just on a different note, I did send out a little postcards to all of our employees with a message that Sir Horacio helped me teach one of them in Spanish and English, and I personally signed each postcard for all employees. Little things like that may seem little to us, but I've actually had employees either email me, call me, or stop me as we're handing out cupcakes, and just really be appreciative of the fact that we're taking a pause. So I know that we had our team in the areas for some of the ESSER funds that were received. We had our counselors. We wanted to know, how do we provide more of that support for our employees? Because ultimately, if our teachers feel better about how they feel about things, then they're going to teach better for our students, which is precisely why Mr. Martinez and I, when the pandemic started, before we even thought of bringing teachers back, Mr. Martinez and I and a group of us walked every single classroom. We wanted to create that space for our teachers to feel protected. And it took us some time to do, but I personally walked every classroom with Mr. Martinez and his crew. So little things like that is, some of the stuff we've done, but we'll keep having those discussions. Ms. Cruz, anything else you want to add to the employee appreciation?
Well, again, thank you. We are already working on a plan, developing a calendar. As there's just so many events throughout the year that it's hard to keep up with all of them. But we are going to develop a calendar and make sure that we don't miss anybody for that purpose. Yes, so on another note, if I may, I have a request for the next budget workshop. I know that pay increases and everything will be decided at a later time. However, if the board decides to go with the pay scales proposed or recommended by TASB, I would ask if we could bring those to you at the next budget workshop so that we can have time to process everything that needs to go in the system and make sure payroll is ready to run once budget is approved. It is going to be an adjustment year for us as far as the system is concerned because everything will change. And then, of course, depending on the approval of the board, those equity adjustments will also need to be processed. And they're individual. So, and there's quite a few. So that would be my request for the next budget workshop. Anything else?
No. And I know down the road is when you're gonna start actual insurance and all that. I feel that we do our employees injustice when we're changing insurances constantly. I mean, they're used to a certain plan, and the following year we change it. And I know that I have family members that are in the district, and they're just, why come you just didn't keep this one? It was a lot better. And I think we're doing an injustice by changing it from insurance to insurance to insurance. I know maybe you want to get the best price on it, but at the same time, the service they're providing is not the same. I mean, personally, what the district had, I don't know if we have it yet. Aetna was one of the better ones. Or Blue Cross Blue Shield or something like that. In any case, I feel that we need to stop changing insurances constantly because that's where you start from scratch again from ground zero.
We can look at it, extending the contract life on the bid itself. This bid, now that we jump back on it now, this one's already locked in, right? I think it's a 3-year. But for the next time we go out for a bid, we can possibly look at maybe 1 year with maybe up to 4 years to extend for a total of 5. I guess the kicker there becomes the stop loss insurance. Essentially, we have insurance that pays for any claim above, it used to be $100,000. It's up, any claim above $125,000 there. That'd be nice, but sometimes the insurance company takes advantage of that. And so if they know they have me for 5 years, they're going to bid low on year 1 on the stop loss insurance, and then they're going to escalate it and make their money over 4 years, right? So I guess that becomes a sweet point is we're at 3 right now. We can increase it to 5, but that may be a risk. That stop loss insurance may go higher and higher and higher. Cigna, for this time that they lost to Aetna, they actually lost because their stop loss, the cost that they wanted to charge me was a lot higher than what Aetna came in at, right? But it came in higher because when we picked them up as part of the bid, I requested a guarantee on the stop loss with a limit on the escalation, right? So I requested, fine, I'll increase the amount from 100,000 to 125, but guarantee your rate. Give me the same rate for 2 years, because the carrier before Cigna took me to the cleaners in year 2 and 3 on the stop loss. So what I can do is I can build a bid that says, I'll give you 3 years, which is a standard, with the possibility of 5 if you guarantee that you won't increase the stop loss too much, right? Maybe limiting them to no more than 5-10% a year, and see if there's any takers. If there are no takers, and at that point we have the option to still look, do we want 3 and then do we want to go up to 5? I mean, we can, for the next time around, we can add more of these provisions into the bid documents.
Another item as far as that, something we need to ask ourselves, like when we're dealing with the insurance, the prescriptions. Because I mean, there's some prescriptions that you can, within again, I go back to, they didn't have issues of whether you take the prescription. Now with what we have, they're limited on to where they can take and the amount. I know I've encountered that with some of my family.
Yeah, so on the price for prescription drugs, so the way the plan is, we decide what the price is, right? When we present the plans to the board with the new rates and the new premiums, there you'll see the line with the generic, the cost for the brand, and what the district pays, right? So we can decide and tweak those, and if we as a district want to pay more towards that piece, then that, I mean, that is an option the board has. The problem then becomes, if health insurance costs just go up, then somebody's gonna have to pay for it, right? If the employees don't pay more, then we pay more, but that is, so the next time we do get scholarship, and remember this last summer, Mr. Randy McGraw gave us 4 different scenarios. We can have, I guess, look at the value for prescription drugs versus generic and see how much the plan pays versus what other districts, what the plan pays for other districts. I'll make a note of both of those.
And Cruz, you were talking about maybe a pay plan, if something wrong. I was looking at all the models, and can you guys maybe add a fourth one? In the board don't mind, I would like to see like model 3. But at the end, see what kind of impact you would have on us in instructional support and operation support of 2%.
Something that's in the previous slide, right?
But yeah, but it's like it's all across, and I'm just wanting.
So you just want that change?
Instructional support and operation.
But he's saying that administrative, professional, and technical be all of the document.
Yeah. And the reason I'm going that route, our support staff, 2% is 26 cents more an hour. Where teacher, of course, they have their degree in this, and at 2% it gives them a lot more money. So, and I'm going back to the insurance. So we give them 26 cents, and then we add to the insurance. So it's like, you know, the pay raise was engulfing the premium and insurance.
Yeah.
So you guys can just do that. I mean, we'll have to make a decision. I know I'm only one person, but
So 2% for teachers, 2% for all the hourly students, and 1% for professionals. Okay, that'll be wonderful.
that's all I have. Thank you.
Would the board like a comparison between the current pay scales and the proposed so that it can help you identify those differences prior to the, okay, please. Thank you. Any other questions that cabinet members may have? Anything or trustees?
I do have one.
Okay, go ahead.
So on this one, additional budget considerations. I know at one point last year, I guess part of the feedback was savings, right? Because we're closed, where's all the savings going? Last year, we didn't see the savings because of the way the state took ESSER money, ESSER 1, right? They supplanted their money, so I didn't see the savings. This year, I'm hoping to see the savings if they don't do that with ESSER 2. So I know the board would want to see some of that or most of that back, but there's some small items here. Like a new battery and desktop for the walk behind, it's $2,000. I know the grounds group has, you'll see their tractor isn't as efficient as it could be, and so they're using some of the mowers for the fields, and they're getting close to end of life. But because of the closures, they have money to pay for some of it. So I guess with the board's permission, I was hoping it would be okay for some of the smaller ticket items, if we have savings left over and if we can get the item now, can we use some of that savings to pay for some of these things, because they would be, one-time items.
I think that would be good. I think that would be okay.
Okay, thank you.
I know Mr. Martinez is smiling.
Yes.
Are we going to drive it? Yeah. Yeah. My yard.
sure they're on property. That's it.
Anyone else? Any other suggestions or questions? Sir Beto, Ms. Cruz, are we good for the next time?
I think so, Dr. Mesa. And thank you. I know, historically, the budget and pay scales have been approved together, so thank you for the flexibility because it does help us. Thank you.
Thank you for all of our work.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of work. Sure. Anything else, Roberto? Hurry up. Hurry up.
I just wanted to say, thank you guys for the work you guys do, and then, I don't know if it has to do with the budget, but I do want to bring up something that maybe work with the city. I'm trying to attract, home builders or businesses to increase, looking at the future, I'm kind of worried about all the students. Since I came in, all it is we're losing.
But what are we doing?
I'm kind of glad to hear about the insurance. I know there's some issues. There's always issues with the insurance, but at least this time you don't see $1 million in the rent. So that's a great job to, see you guys, the work that you guys do.
Thank you.
But yeah, I would like to maybe put that in the agenda for next
Have a
meeting
meeting.
about, somebody from our leadership, even to include us.
Yeah.
Maybe start reaching out to the city and start, trying to attract some home builders. I mean, try to attract some. We need people here first before we can attract any businesses. So, but I think we have good stuff to offer.
Right.
We're going in the right direction, so there's something to look in the.
We, to your point, Mr. Chavez, when we were out there delivering, I know that, we were delivering the senior signs. And, I know that Sir Horacio pointed out, some of the land, what's happening here in San Luis is we have folks moving from, here to this other part of San Luis, not necessarily new people coming in. But I will have, Mr. Martinez start off reaching out. We'll both reach out to the mayor. And start having those discussions and then bring something back. Maybe perhaps we can have the mayor join us at the next regular.
And city council, that would
City council. So we'll work with them to see how we can get them scheduled and might have to be a special board meeting where we bring both groups together and have a discussion.
Yeah, because I think we can share some ideas with them as far as like grants and opportunities to, because I think we're kind of, I don't know what Ms. Hawkins is doing over there. But, no, but I mean, maybe we have some resources as far as, professionals here that know about stuff that I know for a fact that they don't have all those resources, and maybe sharing ideas with them will get stuff started so that they can do their part to, because we both, we're a governing entity, but we're kind of like mutually, or we're bonded, if they don't do anything to kind of move the city forward, we're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
In our own place. I guess we gotta do something to where we reach out to them and start sharing some of that knowledge and some of that expertise as to what they can do to try to improve what they're doing.
We can do that.
I have a question. What about that area, that new area on Herring and Riverside? Way back in, that's not, have they started building on there or?
I don't know.
Mr.
I know what you're
Martinez.
talking about. I think that one was just like a development to do like either put up traders or put up on. And I
But that's still
think,
people moving in.
but that's outside the city limits, so the city doesn't have anything to do. Remember
On
that
the
the city
county side.
limits are kind of, the lines are kind of weird.
But I'm talking about as far as student enrollment goes.
Well, it would help, but again, at the same time, I mean, what kind of tax base are we attracting and all that stuff? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, because we can help out. I know the last one wanted to do it, like there's something going on for upgrading for internet access, right? And that's something that we can work with the city. Because ultimately, they're the ones that are gonna plan and approve what gets built where and how and everything, So I think if we cooperate with each other, we might be able to come up with a better plan and have grow a little bit faster. Because that's kind of like unregulated growth. It's just like, come by and put whatever you want.
Except for traders.
No, they're all helping. I guess we could even put a motor home out there.
Oh, that way we can.
No,
Or not inside.
No, it's in the minutes, but it's outside.
Oh,
The
it's
city is
not
the
in the city.
It's more in the county.
Oh.
Yes,
Mr. Martinez?
yes, good evening. That is correct. The area that Mr. Chavez is mentioning, yeah, it is allowable to put mobile homes there as well. So it is filling fast. I've seen it, and we haven't taken a drive over there. Mobile homes are pretty torn up. And I see, there's people that I need help with that. But haven't seen houses being built. But yes, they belong to us. Should be seeing more kids there as well. This coming later.
Yeah, and because there's a lot of programs. I know there's like self-help programs that that the city can reach out to, so that yeah, they're a little bit more expensive than say a mobile home, but it would be a very affordable house. Start building their own communities like that. I know in Socorro there's plenty of those in that area, and there's self-help, so they get all the permits to do it, and then the families work on their own houses.
Oh, that's awesome.
There's programs like that, but I think we need to reach out to them because maybe they don't know about it, and just share the information and help our community grow.
We will do that.
I reach out to the one more question,
For preparation purposes, of course, coming from HR, right? Will the board be considering any retention stipends for employees? Because whatever we do with compensation and will affect, of course, the numbers for Mr. Rivas. So just something to
Mr. Rivas, are ESSER funds available? Are ESSER funds allowed to be used for retention?
Based on the training that I saw on Friday, it appears as yes,
Okay.
because you're wanting to retain your students, your staff to come back. I can't confirm it, but I believe that's how the house was going to fund their retention stipend. That just
Right.
through SM3. It's a one-time cost. Can't call it an incentive because it's federal funds. The moment you call it an incentive, it becomes allowable, but yes, a retention stipend.
So do we need a
Can we
number?
see? Well, I want to see two options, one for 1,000 and then the other one for 2. If that's okay with everybody. I mean, if you had a different number.
Information on what the other districts are planning on doing. If you do, that will help us on.
Yeah, I do have that information, so I can prepare something for you all to see and okay, decide from there.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I think this feels like we know where we're headed now, what we need to look into and follow up on. So we appreciate that on behalf of the cabinet team for guiding us, and Sir Beto, thank you so much for your work on this.
Thank you all for ABC again. It's still paying off. It is because the base, you're not spread out as much, so it's still paying off. So thank you.
Any more questions?
Thank
you very much again.
Even though we're like this.
So we will now then move along to item 4. Next meeting date, regular board meeting will be Wednesday, June 9, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Board part budget workshop number 2, Wednesday, June 16, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Special meeting for board adoption on Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. May I have a motion to adjourn? I move to adjourn. We'll open on the floor to adjourn at 8:03 by Mr. Hill, seconded by Mr. Madrid. All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries.